There has perhaps never been a more influential and a one-of-a-kind basketball player than Steph Curry, at least in this generation. Here's a guy who was ignored by almost every university because of his size and had to go to a no-name university and work twice as hard as everyone else to get recognition and prove his worth against other hyped-up prospects. He wasn't your typical one and done, but stayed in university for 3 years, improving year in, year out, until where he was the leading scorer in all of D1. Not bad for a guy who was considered too little and not athletic enough, right? Though that wasn't enough to get recognition, and 2 point guards were still taken ahead of him until he got picked by the Warriors. And we all know what happened after, where he became the most unguardable player in the most dominant dynasty of this era, where he was forcing teams to pick him up at half court because of his ability to shoot from anywhere on the court. His career has inspired the next generation of basketball players who may not be the biggest or the most athletic players to try to emulate his game, and also triggered the new era of NBA where any player who may not be the biggest or most athletic but can shoot to be compared to Curry. These comparisons would start very quickly after Curry got into the NBA, as just 2 years after getting drafted, there would be a new prospect emerge who got immediate comparisons to Curry, and his name was Jimmer Fredette. In 2011, Jimmer was coming off an unstoppable college season at BYU, where he won National Player of the Year, averaging 28.9 points, and he was doing something that was only seen once before in college basketball. He was shooting from deep consistently, to the point people started to call it the Jimmer range. And the only other time we see it in college basketball was, yeah, you guessed it, by Steph Curry. These comparisons though went even further than the ability to shoot. Jimmer, just like Steph, was an unrecruited player, as he was deemed too little and not athletic enough to play at a big time university coming out of high school, where they had to commit to a relatively unknown university where they proved every one of their doubters wrong, as they outscored everyone and led their school to a deep run in the NCAA tournament. They also posted damn near identical numbers in their final year in university, where Steph scored 28.6 points, shooting 45% from the field and 39% from the three, and Jimmer on the other hand scored 28.9 points, shooting 45% from the field and 40% from the three. If those numbers weren't identical enough, they were also both terrible defenders coming out of university. I mean, you can't draw up a closer carbon copy of Curry than that, at least on paper. With the hype surrounding Jimmer, he would be drafted pretty high in the draft, as he was drafted 10th overall by the Sacramento Kings. This right here is where the careers of Curry and Jimmer went in opposite directions. Curry was able to go on a dominant run where he won back-to-back MVPs while doing things that the NBA had never seen before, while Jimmer had a pretty different experience in the NBA. Jimmer wasn't able to get away with his lack of athleticism and quickness in the NBA, and it really held him back because he wasn't quick enough to take guards off the dribble, and also struggled to get to the rim, and just in general couldn't create anything for himself. The only way he would have been effective is if he was an exclusively catch and shoot type of role player, but Jimmer had another issue, and that was his ego. An assistant coach who worked with Jimmer in the NBA would even say, Jimmer thinks everybody is stupid. He thinks everybody needs to come in and just turn their offense over and let him shoot it anytime he wants, and that's not how the league works. I mean, talk about not knowing your own abilities. Like, come on dude, you're not Curry to have you running the offense, and even Curry was a much better team player and had a better attitude than Jimmer. We haven't even mentioned his defense, because all the concerns pre-draft about him not being able to play defense because of his size and athleticism turned out to be valid, and he turned out to be one of the worst defenders in the league. So what you got in Jimmer was an undersized, unathletic guard who can't create for himself or for his teammates, has attitude problems, and refuses to change his style to contribute to the team, and is a complete liability on the defensive end. So it's not a surprise he would be benched by his rookie season, being replaced by Kings' second round pick that year, a guard who was even shorter than Jimmer in Isaiah Thomas. Jimmer's role on the team would only continue to diminish in his next 2 seasons before signing with Chicago, where he had even less of a role, and then after that he signed with New Orleans, where it was the same shit, and that would only last a year before he got a 10-day contract with the Knicks, where he didn't get a contract for the season, which marked basically the end of his NBA career. Don't worry though, because Jimmer would find a league that would match his skill set, as he would sign with the Shanghai Sharks in China, where he would go on a dominant 3-year run where in his first season he'd win the MVP, averaging 37.6 points, 8.2 rebounds, and 4.2 assists, and would be unstoppable each of his 3 seasons there, looking like BYU Jimmer, and even would drop a 75-point game in his time in China. After the 3 seasons in China, Jimmer would attempt to come back to the NBA, and he would sign with Phoenix on a 2-year deal, but his first season back in the NBA would be massive contrast to his time in China, because he would only play in 6 games and average 3.7 points per game, which would get the Suns to decline his second-year option and would officially mark the end of his NBA career. Most recently, Jimmer has represented USA in this year's Summer Olympics for the 3-on-3 tournament, but unfortunately for Jimmer, he would get injured in his second game playing for the team and would not play in any of the games after, as the team would get eliminated, going 2-5, which is really embarrassing. Like, come on, bro. How's America getting destroyed this bad in basketball? We could have found random dudes from LA Fitness and we could have done better. Anyways, the next guy we're going to talk about is Trae Young, who is getting comparisons to Curry just 9 games into his freshman season, right after his monster 42 points and 7 assist game in the win against Oregon. And by this point, his numbers was looking, dare I say, Curry-like, or even Curry with better creating ability. I mean, just look at this table comparing Curry's best university season with this 9-game run. He averaged 28.8 points while Curry averaged 28.6, and rest of the numbers were very close, besides one stat, which was assists, where Trae Young got him beat. The numbers weren't the only reason why they were compared. The bigger reason why Young was compared to him was his build. He had the same archetype, right? Shorter, skinnier guards who weren't the most athletic, not the best at defending, but had the rare ability to shoot lights out from anywhere on the court. And what separates them two from other great shooters is that they could shoot from deep off a variety of dribble moves, and not just off the catch or from one dribble pull-ups. Trae Young also had other parts to his game that made him damn near unguardable, because for a guard his size, he was extremely good at getting to the basket, and was also a great playmaker, which meant he could create for himself and others. By the end of his freshman season, he would prove that the 9-game stretch wasn't a fluke, as he led the NCAA in points per game with 27.4 and assists per game with 8.7, and an assist percentage with 48.6%. This performance would understandably catapult his draft stock to a top 5 prospect, and even had Steph Curry as his player comp in the scouting report, which was a huge jump from before the season started, where he was considered a second-round prospect. By the time the draft came around, he would get taken 5th by the Mavericks, but the infamous Luka trade would send him and the Mavericks' first-round pick to Atlanta for Luka Doncic. This trade, I think, would haunt both the Hawks and Trae Young for their entire career, and that's not to say Trae Young is a bad player, but it's quite clear Doncic turned out to be a better player, which people always use to discredit Trae Young, which I think is unfair. In his rookie season, he would play in every game except one, as he scored 19.1 points per game with 8.1 assists, and while he wasn't the most efficient or a good defender, it was encouraging to see his scoring and playmaking translate over to the NBA. His season was good enough to win Rookie of the Year in most seasons, but Luka would have a tiny bit better rookie season, which got him the award. In Trae Young's second season, he would be given the keys to the offense and he would go crazy, leading the league in points, scoring 29.6 points per game with 9.3 assists. But unfortunately for them, this wouldn't translate to wins, as Atlanta finished 4th worst record in the league, going 20-47, which definitely didn't help with the narrative, as he was seen as an empty stats type of guy who just jacked up shots in a bad team, while Luka this season posted similar numbers to him but actually led the Mavericks to the playoffs that year. In the season after though, Trae Young would prove that he wasn't just an empty stat merchant, as he and the Hawks reached the Eastern Conference Finals, where in the first game he would drop 48 points and 11 assists as he led the Hawks to a win. But unfortunately for him, he would get injured in game 3, which meant that he didn't play in game 4 or 5, and by the time he came back, the Hawks would lose the series 4-2. This brings up another point, which is how injury prone Trae Young is due to his frame, which has caused him to miss some games every season after his rookie year. Anyways, after this series, the Hawks and Trae Young would never reach the conference finals again, or even the semifinals, and Trae Young continues to be one of the most disrespected stars in the league, which I think there's a bunch of reasons why, like his ability to play defense. Even though he has improved every year, fans still see him as a terrible defender because that's the image they have of Trae Young. And another reason why is the Hawks' lack of success outside of that conference finals season, which is made worse by the fact that the guy he was traded for became one of the best players in the league and has had continued success with the team. While Trae Young obviously isn't Steph Curry, he turned out to be a damn great guard who is one of the best in the league in being able to shoot and create for the team. The third guy we're going to talk about is Lonzo Ball, who there might not have a lot of people comparing him to Curry, but we have this iconic video of Mike Krzyzemba calling him Steph Curry with a 40-inch vertical. Now, that might be outrageous now, and to be fair, that shit was outrageous back then also. But you know, there was definitely a lot of hype around Lonzo ever since he was in high school, where he went on a dominant run with Chino Hills with his brothers, destroying teams left and right. But what pushed him to stardom was his dad, was the greatest hype man I've ever seen. I mean, this guy was going on ESPN telling that everyone that his son was going to be the next superstar in the NBA, and everybody was eating that shit. I mean, who else's dad is showing up on Monday Night Raw with his sons to boost their brand? That big baller brand was something else, man, I'm telling you. Lonzo wasn't just a hype job though, because he was a damn great player coming out of high school. A 6'6" point guard who was a menace on defense and a damn good playmaker, and could shoot a bit, resembling a bit of Jason Kidd, but obviously not no Steph Curry. For university, Lonzo Ball would choose to stay in Los Angeles and attended UCLA, and at UCLA, he would back up his hype, helping the team reach Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament, and was the only player in the country to average at least 14, 6, and 6, as he averaged 14.6 points, 7.6 assists, and 6 rebounds, which no other player in the Pac-12 conference had been able to do in 23 years, since, funny enough, Jason Kidd did it back in 1993. What might have made Mike Rizemba call him Curry with the 40-inch vert is he did shoot 41% from the 3 that season, although only shot 67% in free throws, which was definitely unusual and might have been an indication that, you know, he wasn't the next Curry. After this season, he would declare for the draft, where his story would continue in Los Angeles, as he got picked second in the draft.
My reaction is how it's always going to be. Right. I told him he was going to go to the Lakers. I'm going to speak it into existence.
And at this moment, his hype was probably at an all-time high. I mean, ever since he was in high school, his dad was telling everyone that his son would become the next great point guard for the Lakers. And now, it was looking like the prophecy would come true. I mean, we even had Magic Johnson himself calling Lonzo the new face of the Lakers right as he got drafted. This hype would only continue to get crazier after the Summer League, because in Summer League, he would go on a record-breaking rampage, averaging a damn near triple-double, averaging 16.3 points, 9.3 assists, and 7.7 rebounds with 2.5 steals and a block a game, and he became the first rookie ever to have 2 triple doubles in Vegas, and also became the first player ever to have more than 10 assists in more than one game with 4 games, and his 9.3 assists a game was the league record. However, that would be the high point of Lonzo's Laker career, because Lonzo would go on to become one of, if not the worst shooter in the NBA. I mean, it was almost like every shot he would take would be a brick. Dude was shooting 36% from the field and 30% from the 3, but the most egregious was dude was shooting 45% from the free throw. I mean, come on, man, how the f you putting up prime Shaq numbers from the free throw as a point guard? To be honest, everyone should have seen it coming. Maybe not to this degree, but him shooting 67% from the free throw at UCLA was definitely a sign there was something wrong with the jumper. But there probably was a bigger sign there was something wrong with the jumper, and that sign is just how ugly his jumper was. I mean, see this right here, Lonzo's jumper in university in his rookie season might be one of the ugliest shits I've ever seen. I don't know why the he was bringing his shooting arm across his body to shoot it like he was going to hit a trick shot every time he was shooting. To pile on everything, Lonzo would also deal with shoulder and knee injuries this season, which caused him to miss 30 games this year. The trajectory of the Lakers would change after this season though, because they would bring in LeBron James, who would become the primary ball handler, which would force Lonzo to play a more off-ball role, which did not suit his play style because he needed the ball in his hands to be effective. But anyways, his jumper would not improve this season, and arguably got worse because he shot 40% from the field, which was an improvement, but somehow got worse at threes and free throws, shooting 33% from the 3 and 41.7% from the free throw. And his injury problems continued to follow him, dealing with ankle injury, which he almost got a surgery to fix until Lakers told him his contract would be voided if he went through with the surgery because he wasn't authorized with the team. Not everything was doom and gloom, because it was evident he could still run the offense when he got the chance and was becoming one of the better defenders in the league, especially at point guard. Lonzo though wouldn't get a chance to improve in Los Angeles though, because after this season he would get traded to New Orleans in a huge trade that included him, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, DeAndre Hunter, and 2 first-round picks, and a first-round pick swap, and cash for Anthony Davis. In New Orleans, he would get away from the attention in Los Angeles and tighten up to start his journey to improve, not just his jumper, but also as a player in general. You could see the improvement by his first season, as his jump shot looked a lot more normal, and as a result, shot much more better, best he ever had. While his shooting percentage from the field was slightly worse than the previous season, he shot much better from the 3 and the free throws this year, shooting 37.5% from the 3 and 56.6% from the free throw, which in other circumstances would be terrible numbers, but for Lonzo, it was a huge improvement. His second season in New Orleans would be even better because he shot career high from everywhere on the field, shooting 41% from the field, 37.8% from the 3, and 78.1% from the free throw, which was the biggest improvement honestly, now that he was an average free throw shooter, and also set a career high in points, averaging 14.6 points per game. game. He was now a plus starter in the league, right? He was one of the best defenders in the league at point guard and could also play make and grab rebounds, and now he was an average shooter, which is more than good enough. He would get rewarded for this improvement and would sign a 4-year $85 million contract with Chicago after a sign-in trade. And in Chicago, he would only continue to get better as he was shooting career best from the field and the 3, as he was now shooting 42.3% from the field and the 3, and helped Chicago get the best record in the Eastern Conference until in January, where Chicago announced Lonzo would undergo surgery for his left knee and miss 6 to 8 weeks, while in April he would be ruled out for the remainder of the season. This knee problem would continue to keep him out of the court not only that season but also the season after, and the season after, which at this point he has finally come back on a part-time basis this year, and it is to be seen if he can come back to his level he was playing at before his knee injury. At this point, we talked about pretty well-known players that have been compared to Curry, but now we're going to talk about a guy who might have been more of an under-the-radar prospect but was nonetheless compared to Curry coming into the draft, and that guy is Tyrell Terry. Terry was a one-and-done point guard coming out of Stanford who was drafted as the first pick in the second round by the Mavericks in the 2020 NBA draft. Coming into the draft, Terry was coming off a season where he scored 14.6 points while shooting 40.8% from the 3, but like Curry, he was extremely skinny, standing at 6'2" at only 155 pounds in his first year, which would be considerably lighter than Curry at the same height. While there were some concerns about his frame, there was also some hype among scouts who were intrigued with his offensive skill set, which got him to be seen as a bit of a boom or bust prospect with a low floor but a high ceiling. There were scouts calling him one of the most intriguing projects in the draft, shade of Steph Curry and Trae Young. There was definitely a bit of excitement around Terry. When the Mavericks drafted him with their pick, there were some expectations that he was drafted to replace Curry, not Steph but Seth, because they had just traded away Seth after a season where Seth provided a pretty nice role from the bench as a sharpshooter, but just 2 years later, Terry would shock everyone and retire at 22 years old. What exactly happened? Well, we have to go back to his childhood, to where he was born in Valley City, North Dakota. Terry's dad, Tyrone, was a great basketball player in his own right, having played at University of Texas at San Antonio and North Dakota State, having been named North Dakota's Mr. Basketball the same year Terry was born. However, the two's relationship was a rocky one, as shortly after Tyrell was born, his parents split up, and he and his mom would move to Minnesota while his dad stayed in North Dakota starting a new family. While these two might not have spent much time with each other, Tyrone would still come see him from time to time, taking him to Disneyland and a Lakers playoff game, and Tyrell would even stay with Tyrone in North Dakota one summer. They both had a love for the sport of basketball, but this wouldn't necessarily bring the two together because Tyrone took the tough love approach with Tyrell when it came to basketball. For instance, when Tyrell showed his father his first YouTube mixtape hoping that his dad would compliment his son's abilities, Tyrell would instead respond saying that mixtapes do not make decent players, and when the two played one-on-one growing up, many times his dad would bully the young Tyrell, leaving him in tears, and they would often argue over basketball more and more as Tyrell grew older, up until high school where the two stopped talking to each other. The tough love didn't really work on Tyrell because he was always a more of an anxious person who was unsure about his ability in basketball, even though he was extremely gifted from an early age. As a young kid, he would join a basketball team coached by his mom's former classmate Larry Suggs, who is the dad of Jalen Suggs, who was also part of the team. Terry would play point guard and would run the team, but he nonetheless felt overshadowed by Jalen, who felt he had the mentality, confidence, and the skill set earlier than he did, which made him feel like a Robin to his Batman. The two were regardless close with each other, and the people on their team would enroll at Minnehaha Academy for middle school, with the plans that the boys would stay at this school for middle and high school. However, Terry would transfer to De La Salle High School without telling anybody, which hurt the two's relationship, which would be damaged until Jalen joined the NBA and the two reconnected. In De La Salle, Terry would go on a dominant run, winning multiple state titles, as he would commit to Stanford after high school, largely due to their academics, as he wasn't sure if he would even make the NBA. He would continue to be unsure at Stanford, and 2 weeks into preseason practice, he would ask the coach Gerard Hess if he could redshirt that season, as he felt it was too hard and he wasn't ready. But Hess urged him to wait a bit more before making a decision, to which eventually Terry would decide to play that season, which would turn out to be the right decision, as he would be named to All Freshman Pac-12 and start to get some scouts interested in him. He still wasn't sure whether to enter the NBA draft, as he didn't feel ready for the NBA, but Hess told him that he couldn't guarantee him as many shot attempts next season, as they were bringing in a top prospect Zaire Williams the next season. Terry decided to enter the draft, and his priority would be to bulk up, as NBA personnel suggested that he get bigger to survive NBA's physicality, so he would lift weights and ate until he felt nauseous, and by the time he reached the draft draft combine he weighed 170 pounds. This would make Terry feel more burnt out and start to lose the love of basketball because of the isolation and repetition of the workouts, as this was 2020, right, when COVID hit, which meant that the draft wasn't until November, so that was more than a half a year of working out in isolation. After getting drafted, this problem would turn worse and he would become very anxious as the G League didn't play a real season and he didn't get a full-time NBA roster spot, which put him in a limbo where he barely played, which caused his anxiety to get worse and worse as the year went on, as he was never the most confident player to begin with, but always had the fact that he was one of the best players on the team. Now that wasn't the case in the NBA. He would be nauseous every day, and every time he had to go to practice or the gym, he would puke before going. He would get into his own head, overthinking everything, like thinking, who's my matchup, how good are they, how am I going to perform, how many people are in the crowd, what if I go out there and shoot 0 for 15, which caused him to get panic attacks when he thought about playing the sport. He would try to cope by using the fact that he now earned a lot of money and got a lot of attention, so there was nothing to be sad for, which wouldn't work, and he would start to gain disdain for the sport that he once loved for making him feel the way he did. After playing in 11 games, he had enough and contacted the Mavericks director of psychology and told him he couldn't play anymore, and he took a leave of absence from the team. He would start to work with the Mavericks psychiatrist who prescribed him 2 anti-anxiety medications, which would sometimes work, but also sometimes it would make him feel nauseous, which made him turn away from the drug. He would eventually lose trust in the psychiatrist when the psychiatrist asked him when he could tell the team he would be ready to practice again, which made him think that he didn't have his best interest in mind, but rather was looking out for the team. Even worse, his relationship with his father was still not in good terms, as Tyrell tried to repair his relationship when he offered his father a ticket to a Stanford game when Tyrone's wife reached out, but the two wouldn't speak to each other at the game, and he wouldn't show up at his draft night party either. He wouldn't call him when he took the leave of absence either, which hurt him, as he knew he did everything his parents wanted him to do. He got into Stanford, made it to the NBA, and became rich, but his dad still didn't congratulate him once, which made him feel unfulfilled. He would stop taking the anti-anxiety medication and would instead try psychedelic therapy, which helped a bit, and by the time the next season's training camp came around, his anxiety was still affecting him, and at this point, he would say to his agent he was done and wanted to quit, to which the Mavericks agreed to release him. Just a couple months later, he would return to the NBA and sign with the Grizzlies on a 10-day contract, then to a 2-way contract where he would spend the time in G League and in the NBA, but he would struggle to fit in the G League because he was a bit of an outsider, right? Most of the players were veterans grinding to earn a shot in the NBA, while Terry was a young player who quit basketball and came back and had a guaranteed spot on the roster, and little things like him sitting in the first class on flights because of a stipulation in the contract, while older, taller players had to sit and coach, created tension between Terry and the veterans. He would get released after that season, to which he wouldn't attempt to return to basketball and would instead decide to go back to Stanford to study, which is where he was until recently this year, when in August 2024 he was signed with Limoges CSP in the French league, but he would leave the team after playing in 2 games. Whatever Terry has got going on, I hope he gets better and overcomes the anxiety, because I can tell you from experience, the anxiety, the nauseousness, and the panic attacks is terrible and limits your life in many ways. So I hope you can overcome this and maybe one day make a return to the NBA, which would be the greatest comeback story ever in the NBA. Now we're going to talk about another Ball brother, this time Lamelo, who I feel is a lot more deserving of Curry comparisons than Lonzo. This guy was getting compared to Curry in high school, and I mean, I can see why, because how many high school kids can shoot from half court like this guy? Because this guy was calling a shot, pointing at the floor, and making it from half court. I mean, who does that? This guy was different, and he even had Steph Curry reacting to this clip, and this was during Lonzo's freshman season at UCLA, so he was low-key outdoing his older brother once he went to the university, at least in terms of offense. This guy also had a crazy run to the NBA, because right after the season, he ended up skipping his junior year and played in the Lithuanian Professional League as a junior, where he wasn't all that great, but keep in mind, this guy was a kid. I mean, he was still a junior in high school at this point, and in his senior year, he would transfer to another school, Spire Institute and Academy in Ohio, where there was teams canceling their games against this team because LaMelo's professional experience would threaten their eligibility under the state federations, and his team would even be removed from the Hoop Ball Classic tournament because the event organizers didn't pay the $10,000 request from the Ball family for LaMelo playing in the tournament. After graduating high school, he couldn't even play in college, even though he was verbally committed to play at UCLA since 13 years old, because he was considered a professional due to his time in Lithuania. So he was forced to play professionally in Australia, where he had a great season, averaging 17 points, 7.4 rebounds, and 6.8 assists, and winning Rookie of the Year. This season greatly increased his draft stock because before that season, the hype around LaMelo was low, and he was projected to go either in the second round or even undrafted. But after this season, he was now projected to go top 3 in the draft. In the draft, he would be picked 3rd by the Hornets, where he would have a great rookie year, averaging 15.7 points, 5.9 rebounds, and 6.1 assists, winning Rookie of the Year. And then in the next season, he would get better. At this time, would become an all-star. However, just like Lonzo, injuries would hit LaMelo as he fractured his ankle, which would cause him to have surgery that kept him out for the rest of the season. And in the next year, he would only play 22 games. LaMelo at this point is known as a bit of a chucker who's only scoring because he's taking a ton of shots in a bad team that's never made the playoffs while he's in the team. But I feel that's not giving him enough credit because when he has played, they are much better, and they probably would have made the playoffs if LaMelo was healthy in any of those years. LaMelo is obviously not Curry, but is a very exciting player, and this year he's doing great. But the Hornets, they're a bit meaty, but that's not because of LaMelo. Dude's doing great and doing what he can. If he can stay healthy and Charlotte gets him some support, then they could be a consistent threat in the East.